In one of our previous videos, we explained how Trump's efforts have helped Israel in focusing on one single enemy at a time and avoid a multiple front war. It was under Donald Trump that the United States was able to build a very solid and intimidating coalition of Middle Eastern allies. The Abraham Accords were the most important development in the region for a long time because they diminished the divisions and fault lines which were created and fostered in the region by many players. UAE, Bahrain, and later Sudan and Morocco formally agreed to normalize ties with Israel and join the broader diplomatic realignment in the Middle East. Even Saudi Arabia, under modernist Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, was informally a part of the alliance as it didn't utter a single word of criticism against the accords and in fact strengthened its trade and military ties with Israel. Now that a war has broken out between Israel and Hamas, the friend states, though being Arabs, were quiet. They weren't joining their Arab brothers in trying to erase Israel from the face of the earth. And now, one Arab nation has gone on to threaten Hamas to stop its attacks on Israel at once. And the reason behind this unthinkable development is the 45th American president, Donald Trump. Hi and welcome. You're watching TFI Global, the foreign affairs and geopolitical analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. And I'm your host, Atul Mishra. In this video, I will tell you about how Abraham Accords is coming to Israel's rescue at a time when it needs it the most. Let's begin. Israel's friend Donald Trump may no longer be in power, but his legacy lives on and protects the Jewish nation from a hostile administration in Washington, D.C. In fact, Trump brokered peace deals between Arab countries and Israel, dubbed Abraham Accords, continue to shine. The Trump administration had invested itself into brokering the Abraham Accords and had managed to finalize such agreements for Israel with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. The United Arab Emirates, which was the first of all Arab nations to sign an Abraham Accord with Israel, has reportedly issued a stern warning to Hamas. As per Israeli media, the UAE is said to have asked Hamas to stop its hostile actions against Israel, or else its planned investments in the Gaza Strip may not move forward. Globes, a Hebrew language financial newspaper, has quoted a senior Emirati official as saying, "We are still ready and willing to promote civil projects in cooperation with the Palestinian Authority and under UN management in Gaza. But our necessary condition is calm." The unnamed UAE official added, "If Hamas does not commit to complete calm, it is dooming the residents of the Strip to a life of suffering. Its leaders must understand that their policies are first and foremost hurting the people of Gaza." The UAE, which happens to be the most influential Arab nation after Saudi Arabia, has therefore subtly signaled that Hamas is the real aggressor, and it is up to the Gaza-based group to cease hostilities. Abu Dhabi has clearly taken a very different stance this time around in reference to the Israel-Gaza conflict. Earlier, the Arab world used to condemn Israel, but Trump's Abraham Accords have clearly changed the Middle East, and now Arab nations are really behaving like Israel's allies. The relationship between the UAE and Palestine was already getting embittered in the wake of the Abraham Accords. Palestinian leaders had dismissed the Arab-Israel peace agreements as treason. Later, in February this year, the UAE had cut back funding to the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees in a harsh response to adverse remarks by Palestinian leaders. Within the Biden administration and the Western liberal media, there was a hope that unrest in Jerusalem, hostilities between Israel Defense Force or the IDF and Hamas, and street violence between Arabs and Jews in Israel would halt the progress made by the Abraham Accords. But no prize for guessing. Abraham Accords have not succumbed to Biden's manipulations and machinations. After days of walking a diplomatic tightrope, at least the UAE has shown a tendency to work in Israel's favor amidst the ongoing Israel-Gaza conflict. The conclusion is clear. Trump's Abraham Accords have turned out to be a grand success. They are shining and pushing the Middle East towards peace, despite all the propaganda against them by Western liberal media.